Today I have the distinct privilege of spending some time with Marion Flagg. Marion Flagg served as the president of our association, Potomac and Chesapeake. She was, in 1984, awarded the most prestigious award that our association offers, and that's the Richard L. Apperson Award. She spent her career working with students in the public high schools of the District of Columbia. And for 20 years, our association has had a scholarship named for her for people who work today with underrepresented populations. So Marion Flagg, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Personal information, a little background on where you grew up, perhaps, and a little bit about your early education.
Well, I was born in a small town in North Carolina, population 800 approximately, and the county high school was located in Winton. That was the name of the town. And my mother told me, and I just remember parts of it, that when I was 4, children who had failed in a subject were sent to a lady so that they could be prepared to move on to the next grade. And I was sitting out front greeting the kids and asking them where they were going. And then I said, well, I went in and told my mother that I would like to go too. And she talked to this woman who did all of this work with children to keep them in their grade, on their grade level, was the mother of my first grade teacher as a result of this encounter. Because when Mama approached Miss Annie, that we call her, she agreed that I could come with the children. She said, sure, let her come. A few days later, Miss Annie came and said that I wanted a paper and pencil like the other children had. So Mama provided that. And then a little later on, she came and told my mother that she thought that she should buy a primer for me because she thought I was ready to read. So of course Mama was pleased and did just that. Well, to make a long story short, when school opened, Miss Annie told my mother that I was ready for the first grade. The laws in North Carolina at that time allowed that to happen because 2 years later, when my sister entered school, you had to be 6 in order to start the first grade. But as a result of this beginning, I finished high school. The school consisted of 11 grades, and I finished high school at 14. At 15, and I was 15 2 months later. So I entered college at 15 and graduated 2 days before I was 19.
Now, where did you enroll? And
I went to Howard University, and my parents were reluctant for me to go to such a big school. But fortunately, my father's aunt was the wife of Professor Beaudry, who was the head of the math department. And they promised my father that they would look after me. And they did. And I was very happy to go because I did not want to go anywhere else. Now, and I think it was largely because of my devotion to these 2 people who really looked after me.
Mm-hmm.
But but anyway, I remember that Christmas, that freshman year, I told my mother that I wasn't going back. So when she inquired as to why, I said, well, I'm homesick, and I just don't like it. So my mother, fortunately, looked at me and shrugged her shoulders, and she said, all right, then you can sit on the front porch and rock with me for the rest of your life. Well, I decided that was not a good alternative, so I decided to go back. And it was interesting that when I went back home, I received a job, principal of a two-teacher rural school. I was principal because I had the 4th through the 7th grade.
Now, this was after graduation?
This is after graduation.
Mm-hmm.
And I had decided, of course, that teaching was the only thing that I could do. I did not have a counselor, unhappily, to inform me that I could have majored in music, which I really wanted to do. But I did not realize that you could go to college, major in music, and not have to be a concert pianist. I did not realize that you could teach high school or junior high music.
But then how did you decide to become a counselor?
Well, after one stint I think that my experience in that first school had a lot to do with my starting to feel that I would like to work with children, because the school I learned after I got the job, and people kept telling me how sorry they were for me because I was going to this school to work. They said, you know, the teacher out there does not control those children at all. And one man said that when he rode by the school, they all came to the window and shouted at him. But anyway, when I started there, I found that to be true again. Really true. So I went home and told Mama that I was going to give it up. I could develop a toe ache that was so extreme that I needed a substitute, who turned out to be Miss Annie, the same lady who took me originally, you know, into her hands. Well, Mama again informed me that I would end up not having a job. She said, you can leave if you wish, but you won't go to the high school, because I had been promised that I would go to the high school from which I had graduated. When I thought about it again, what my mother said, and decided that I was going to stay. And if I was going to stay, I would have to use some of the methods I had been taught in college in educational psychology. So through a process of getting the leader of all of the disarray in the classroom, I asked her if she would help me. Told her that I didn't have a elementary school diploma, and that she could help me if she would. So when she asked me what she could do, I said, you could correct papers, or maybe you could teach. She was very bright. 6th grade something, while I took care of others. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, she helped me control that situation. And that was the first time that I had even contemplated how teachers should help kids by finding out what they were really like and doing. Because she went on. I know that I may be getting off the subject, but it was interesting that I taught her English for 4 years. I retired, got married, but I called her in and told her, please not to bury herself. In the woods, I told her, because that's where she lived. And I said, you could go to college.
So you were actually doing some counseling there.
I was
at
doing
that point in
but did
time,
not realize it, yes.
But then later in high school, when you were teaching, what moved you to that idea of helping students through the transition from secondary school to college?
I'd been teaching at a junior high school for 11 years. And one day, I don't know what happened, but I came to. And my class was looking at me in amazement. And one child said, oh, Lord, Mrs. Flagg said, you really were raving. And I was shocked, speechless. When I went home that afternoon, I told my husband, I said, it's time for me to come out of the classroom. And he says, well, what will you do? I said, either counseling or speech therapy. The very next afternoon, when I came down to check out, there was a sign on the bulletin board stating that any teacher with a master's degree would be eligible to take the first counseling exam prepared by ETS and given to teachers in the district. So I signed up, found out that, and took the test and managed to pass it. And I was placed at Banneker Cardozo. The Banneker kid, I was the 9th grade counselor, but the kids, I was in charge of the 9th grade there, but I got a taste of what being in high school was like. And one day I went down and to ask the principal if there would be any way that I could probably stay at Cardozo, because I was slated to go to a junior high the next year. But when I entered the office, he said to me, Mrs. Flagg, come here. Well, of course, the fear of the Lord then took over. And I said, well, I'll never get the nerve to ask him now. I sat down. He said, how would you like to stay at Cardozo? I could not believe my ears. That was it.
So that was the beginning.
That was the beginning. I replaced the counselor who was moving up to a principalship, who later became assistant superintendent. She had worked with an Upward Bound program. And of course, when I took her position, then I worked with Upward Bound, went to the University of Maryland that summer, and came back to Cardozo with 2 senior sections and 10 10th grade sections. And in June, I had more kids going to college out of my 2 sections than the senior counselor had, who had the other sections of the senior party.
And what was your first exposure then during that time to the National Association and to Potomac and Chesapeake?
After I had been at Cardozo about a year, a counselor at another high school called me one day and she said, Marion, she said, you know, there's an organization that I think you should join. She said it's, and she explained to me it was the Potomac and Chesapeake chapter of NACAC. And so I said, okay, anything, that sounds good to me. She helped me to register, and my husband drove me to Fredericksburg, Virginia, because the conference was held at the Sheraton Hotel there. And I met Conrad Warlick, who was at Mary Washington, Tom Pollard at the University of Richmond, and Juanita Wallace, who was an assistant director of admissions at William and Mary. And that was the beginning. I understand Juanita was, let's see now, under Conrad, Juanita had chaired the Human Relations Committee. Mm-hmm. Ernie Earn at the University of Virginia gave her my name. And so I worked with her. And the next year when Tom Pollard became president, then I chaired his Human Relations. And it was at that time that I proposed seeking out counselors who worked with underprivileged youngsters for scholarship aid to join PCACAC. Mm-hmm. And and it passed. Tom presented it to the board, and it passed. Mm-hmm. We tried. It was successful, I think. I never could get people in West Virginia, however, to participate. They did not see the value of that. And I found out that the parents had a large role in finding a college for the kids. Mm-hmm. And, but anyway.
So you were very much involved, not just with counseling students of the selection of their future college, but also in providing the means for them to attend. Not only for your students at Cardozo, but now you've grown to make that a goal for members of PCAC.
Right.
Through
And you know, when the year that I was president, I was very nervous, anticipating, taking charge of this meeting. And who should walk in but John Castine, who's now retiring from the University of Virginia. And I feel ashamed every time I think of the fact that I approached him about becoming the next president of PCAC. And of course, shortly thereafter, he very graciously told me that, he was so involved that, he would be unable to do it. But I established a sort of communication with him, so that when he became president of UVA, he invited me to his inauguration. Mm-hmm. My husband always drove me to the national conferences, and I went to the national conference, I came to PCAC because I felt that if I knew the dean of admissions at a college, then when I wrote a letter of recommendation, they knew who it was coming from.
Absolutely.
And so I went to all the national conferences, and I came to PCAC conferences for 33 straight years.
So you were networking with other professionals for the sake of your students, not for your own advancement, but for the sake of your students.
That's right, and that was.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember that, but I got off a little bit. I just wanted to tell you one thing. My husband drove me to all these conferences, with the exception of one. We flew to Dallas because Texas Christian had invited me down, and they agreed that he could come along if I paid, his half of the expense.
Mm-hmm.
So when I received the invitation to go to John Castine's inauguration, I was in Louisville, Kentucky at the national conference. And it was interesting, I got on a bus to go visit some location, and a man got on who was from University of California at Berkeley. And I said, pardon me, sir, do you happen to know, and I called the girl's name. He said, oh yes, I know her. He said, she works in my office. But anyway, we left the national conference early and drove back to Charlottesville for the inauguration of Mr. Castine. At the end of it, Jack Blackburn asked me, he was in Dean, if I had seen President Castine. I said, no, I haven't. He says, well, come with me. So he took me to another building, and he went in a room and brought John Castine back, who greeted me courteously, and he asked me, was I coming to the luncheon? And I said, what luncheon? He says, oh, we're having a luncheon. He turned to Jack Blackburn and he said, you get Marion 2 tickets, Marion and Charlie. I'm sitting at the table with Jack Blackburn on my left. And I glanced over at a lady who had gotten up and a student with her. And I said to Jack, I said, is that Linda Robb? And he said, yes, it is. So I said, I feel terrible that I never wrote the letter to Lyndon Johnson that I planned to write, thanking him for all of the help my children got as a result of his legislation.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I ought to go over and tell her that, out of the blue. And of course, Jack took his elbow and punched me. He said, well, go. And I said, do you think I really should? He said, sure, go. And he kept punching me. So I got up and went in her direction, approached her, and she stopped. And I told her I was a counselor from the District of Columbia, and I wanted to tell her what I never told her father. Because I never wrote the letter that I planned to write, and it was interesting to see the tears gather in the child's eyes, because that was the time when they were giving him a hard time. It was Vietnam, and she thanked me very much, and I think that was one of the best experiences I had in acknowledging,
And
my
that
gratification.
Lobbying aspect of seeking out Congress to appropriate money for students
Yes.
that you worked with and others like you
Yeah.
has continued
The
to
Pell
this day.
Grant came in, and I mean, I had one child who went to Simmons College in Boston, and she had a work study, $1,000 work study. Everything else was either work or funds that she used. Now, I talked to a young woman just the other day who ran into this same counselor who introduced me to PCACAC. Gwen saw this child and thought she was her student, but it turned out she was Karen Tucker, who went to Hartford and Trinity. Who went to Trinity in Hartford, Connecticut. And she said that Karen wants to get in touch with you to thank you for giving her the opportunity to go to college and to have the money to do so. She said because her parents had no money. But anyway, I called her the other day and touched base. Now, she finished Cardozo in 1970. So she's working for a law firm now.
So that early effort that you made was certainly a significant milestone, and I'm sure that area of need for students continues to
Oh, it's still, yes. There is so much talent that is lost. I have always said that if you go out in an alley and you see a young man on his knees gambling, and he knows what he's doing, and he's capable of doing calculus. So give him the opportunity.
Give them the chance.
Yeah, give him a chance.
What do you vision for the future in NACAC and or Potomac and Chesapeake?
Well, my feeling has a lot to do with that personal element. I think that all counselors who have the job, because it is a job, you have to work at it, to help youngsters who could become great citizens, making great contributions, if they have the opportunity to do so. And I think that counselors who work in college admissions should become a part of both PCACAC and NACAC, because it is there that you learn from the people with whom you come in contact. You learn from them. You have opportunities to speak for your children, for your students, by touching base with future presidents of a university.
What aspects of your career in college admission counseling do you feel, and I'm sure there's many, what do you feel has given you the greatest professional and personal satisfaction?
Well, I think I have a little box at home with a card file. And in that card I have, in that box, I have a list of colleges where my students went to study and received the baccalaureate degrees. And I have 101 cards in that box. I remember I had 14 students who went to Bowdoin College, and 9 of whom graduated from Bowdoin. The other 5 left because they didn't like the weather, but they subsequently graduated from some other college. But I have a teacher, 2 doctors, and 3 lawyers out of that group. all of them are doing very well. I have one student who graduated, and I use Bowdoin as an example because I had more graduating from Bowdoin than anywhere else. But Princeton, Harvard, Florida A&M, colleges in the middle of the country, small, large, and I remember there was a college, Mount Union, and once when I was on this task force with NACAC, with Jim Alexander and Conrad, who was at Rensselaer, and Jim went out looking for antiques, and we passed this college. And I said, oh, what college is it? It's Mount Union. And when I looked at that college, I said it had to take a great deal of effort for the child to remain there. But because it was bleak out in the country, and she was maybe one of 4 or 5 black students out of a population of 1,400. But I used to tell them that you don't pay it, you adjust. And remember that you are there for an intangible something that no one can ever take away from you. And I said, and when you graduate, then you can do the things that you want to do. But anyway, I had a child who went to Bowdoin who could not, he was from one of the islands, and he could not pass the MCAT because he wanted to be a doctor. He went to Harvard, got a job in the research department, published, and reapplied to the University of Indiana, and he is now practicing medicine in Michigan. So this is the type of thing the people who make up PCACAC and NACAC are the one who interact with each other, who pass on information, with whom you can talk. I remember on one occasion I had a child who got in trouble at school, and she did something that was not very ladylike. She was chasing someone around the building. Now, when I wrote her recommendation, I didn't mention that. But I went to PCACAC a month later, and Jack Blackburn was sitting in the bar with a guy from Virginia Tech, and so I said, Jack, may I see you for a moment? And he said, sure. So he came out. I said, listen, I sent you an application. And I told him about the incident. I said, I'm not going to put in writing what this child did. I said, I think it was a one-time incident. She got upset with her little boyfriend or something. But she went to UVA and graduated. But I felt obligated to tell them. I was not going to send, if the child had not shown that side of herself, I would not. But she did all right. But look at Joe Monty. When I was president, I asked him to chair the government end of the thing. He always knew what was going on. And he informed the people, in the assembly. I didn't know. So you have to observe what's going on, listen, and relate, and share. And as a result of that, many young people can become contributing citizens.
Well, Marion, it sounds as though the many students that you've helped over the years have brought you great satisfaction and joy, but I assure you that that is probably only a small portion of what they feel for you, for what you've done for them, and also what you've done for people in NACAC, what you've done for people in Potomac and Chesapeake. We all appreciate you and what you've done, and we want to say thank you.
Well, I wish to say the same thing for all of the good things all of the wonderful things, the wonderful experiences, and the great people that I have met and worked with through the years, through PCACAC and NACAC. I thank them because they made it possible.